When Metros meet Houstonys. 100 plus players have donned Houston and New York uniforms in their histories. Hey everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This episode, kind of a history of players who have played for the Astros and the Mets, was inspired, of course, by Howard Fredericks. He had sent me an email as he was watching the opening three-game series between the Astros and the Mets. And I don't know whether our young fans have watched, but the Astros and the Mets both came into being in the same year in the National League, 1962. It's when the National League expanded from 10 to 12 teams. They went to a 162-game schedule. And actually, the Astros were in the league until they switched to the American League, where they've actually been more accomplished, winning a number of World Series, and probably really their history just being launched by a number of future Hall of Famers, including Jose Altuve. But the Mets and the Astros seem to be linked in a little bit. They had that great 86 championship series, the one in particular, Game 6 going to about 15 or 16 innings, and the Mets finally winning it because they were fearful of facing Mike Scott. They had them Mike Scott had them basically baffled, puzzled, and really he owned them psychologically. And everyone who had watched that game, now this is back October of 1986, knew that the Mets had to win Game 6. They were up in the series 3-2. Had to win that dramatic, and they were down 3-0 late in the game when the Amazons managed to tie the score, and then went unbelievably excruciating extra innings until Jesse Orosco struck out Kevin Bass for the final out in an electrifying game. I hate using that word electrifying because it's become such a cliche, but it was such a shocking and amazing game to everyone who watched it. And you were on literally biting your nails on pins and needles throughout that series, especially knowing that the Mets were not, and this was a team that won over 100 games and had just throttled the National League in 86. You just knew the Mets were not going to beat Mike Scott, especially in the Astrodome in a Game 7. So they avoided that. And, of course, the rest is history, as they would win a dramatic Game 7 after being down almost the same way in Game 6 to the Red Sox in that 86 World Series. And then they rallied to win that game as well, and then won the World Series. And they haven't really sniffed the World Series championship since then. I know they got to a couple of series against the Yankees and, of course, the Kansas City Royals, but really haven't come close to matching that team and just a buzzsaw machine, that Met team. And, of course, it didn't last for long. They would never get back to that particular core group of players, would never get back to the World Series. But hey, Howard and I were talking about it and throwing it around, and I said, well, I had a show for last week, but I said, you know what? Let me investigate this. And the funny thing is, there is a real nostalgic theme or twist to this story. I'm just going to give you a couple of guys, or just a litany of the players. Here are some of the early ones. And actually, here's Mike Scott in an Astro uniform. You know, he won a Cy Young with the Astros in 1986. Came close in 1989, almost winning a second Cy Young, which would put him in really kind of a strange layer in terms of Hall of Fame, because he would have had two Cy Youngs, a la Denny McLain, but probably had 150 wins. Maybe was not as dominant as McLain was in 68 and 60, and certainly not 68, but he definitely had a run there, about 3-4 years with the Astros. And like I said, he just was in the Mets' mind. He was living rent-free in Met batters' minds. And, of course, you have Nolan Ryan. He wasn't even the first guy I actually came up with, and I didn't get a picture of the guy I'm thinking of. I thought of Danny Heap first. And then you start to realize, hey, wow, Carlos Beltran played for the Astros. I forget that, you're talking about 20 years ago. So maybe a little dementia is setting in. You just don't recall some of the players. I have mentioned Tommy Davis a number of times. Davis, of course, is one of my favorite players growing up. Didn't really get to see him play his early years. I just remember him being really, as an Oakland A DH, and then playing for the Baltimore Orioles his last couple of years. And he could always hit. Really a line drive hitter, more of a gap hitter, 13 home runs, that type, 15 home runs. But in the early part, had he not wrecked his ankle, you're talking about a great, a potential Hall of Fame player. And of course, he played with the Mets for 1 year, then went to the Astros in 1969 after playing for another expansion team, the Seattle Pilots. Now, the problem with Davis, probably for most of his career, kind of had a lead glove. Nobody really knew. Even the Dodgers really didn't have a position for him. They tried him, I think, at third. They played him at first, played him in the outfield. Didn't have the range, kind of stuck him in left. For the longest time until Ron Say came on that early 70s team, Dodgers couldn't find a third baseman. They tried with Richie Allen / Dick Allen, traded for him in the winter of 1970. He lasted 1 year and then, of course, goes on to glory with the White Sox. But Tommy Davis he was built for DH, and he had a final average of 289, and he didn't really disappoint the Mets because in 1967, when he was playing for them, I just want to get this, Davis played for the Mets in 67, and a Brooklyn guy, no less, and he did play for the Dodgers, did play, I think, for the 63 team that won the World Series, the 62 team, just to give you an idea of, at age 23, this is what you're talking about. Maybe an Edgar Martinez type of player. He had a 5.9 WAR, played 163 games in 1962 because they had they tied the Giants and then played a 3-game series. Had 230 hits to lead the league, a la Joe Torre in 71. Had 153 RBIs to lead the league. Hit 346 to lead the league. Had an on-base percentage of 374. Only drew 33 walks. So he was really hitting. Had a 535 slugging average, had 27 home runs. Now, that would be the apex for him. When I say that he was really just a line drive hitter, prior to that 27 home runs, he had 11, 15, then followed that with 16 and 14, and only reached double figures in home runs 2 other times in his career. Once with Baltimore in 74, when he had 1184 and hit 289, and then one other year with the Mets, when he had 1673 and hit 302. And that 302 would be the last time until 1973 that he hit over 300 for the season. He hit 306 with the Baltimore Orioles, 7 homers, 89 RBIs. But for me, I just saw him always as an RBI guy, always decent numbers, 290, 289, but you can see that he kind of played for the Dodgers, then 1 year for the Mets, then 1 year for the White Sox. Then he went to the Pilots in the expansion because 2 reasons. He was 29, and the White Sox, like a lot of teams, couldn't find any room at the inn for him in terms of a defensive position. And, of course, the DH, which he was made for after wrecking his ankle and not really having a great glove, wouldn't come into being in the American League until 73. And then wound up with Baltimore, played a couple of years there, basically took over the spot for another former Astro, Lee May. When you think about it, they went back and forth. May would play first base and DH. Pretty much Davis was just a DH. Actually, he played 137, 158, and 116 games for the Orioles as a DH. And then his final 2 teams was California and KC. Really, what I did find out when I was doing some of these is how many of these players that played for the Mets and the Astros played for a number of other expansion teams, like Tommy Davis, who would play for the Mets, Seattle Pilots, the Kansas City Royals, the California Angels, and the Houston Astros. 5 teams that came into being after in the 60s or after that. So he was one of them. And of course, you have Rusty Staub. Let me just get a picture of Rusty Staub here. I love the Grand Orange, and I'll talk about Staub in a second, but I just want to throw these guys out here. So here's Rusty, obviously with his Colt 45s, and then he played for the Astros when they were newly named, or christened when they moved into the Dome, and then he played for the Expos. You know, it's interesting. Staub also plays for teams that played for expansion teams that no longer go by their nickname, the Colt 45s and the Montreal Expos. And then he played actually for the Texas Rangers, who were the second coming of the Washington Senators. So that's some trifecta for LeGrand. He was simply one of my favorite players of all time. And of course, I had to include this picture just to give the viewers at home why he was called. And when my brothers taught me how to say Le Grand Orange, I thought, man, I had French down pat, that I could be fluent in that. I struggle with the English language, let alone trying to learn a new one. And I'm just going to, here's Rusty Staub. I did probably do a pretty good job. And the reason why, maybe I'll get it out there, is that Staub, of all the players I was looking at, probably had the closest numbers and probably had the closest, how do I say this? You could probably see him as both an Astro and a Met, even though he spent more time in a Met uniform later on as a pinch hitter for the Mets up until 85. But I'll give it to you here. Here's what I'm talking about. Of all the players that I saw, he had the most balanced statistics for both the Astros and the Mets. For instance, he played for the Astros for 6 years, 1963 to 68. Does make the All-Star team for them. He then he goes in the draft. He goes to the Expos, and then comes to the Mets in a big trade. Remember, another Oriole, Ken Singleton, would be traded in that deal with Mike Jorgensen and Tim Foley, who would go on to be the really a big piece in that 79 We Are Family team. And but it was a good deal for the Mets because they did get a pennant out of it. They did. And they could have, had he not gotten hurt. Well, it's the if question all the time. But anyway, he played for the Mets from about 72 to 75 and then would come back again. But ready for this? With the Astros, he played 833 games. With the Mets, 942. With the Astros, he had 2,906 plate appearances, or at-bats, and he hit 273. With the Mets, 2,571 at-bats. And when you think about it, that's pretty impressive that it is that close, because most of the later years, he was only being a DH. Only being playing spottily, maybe at first base or in the outfield, but mostly serving as a DH and as a mentor to the young players. 942 games he played for the Mets, 2,571 at-bats, hit 273 with the Astros, which, I'm going to tell you something, was pretty good in the late 60s, especially in the Dome, where every hit ball turned to dust in the Astro atmosphere. It was dead air, even with the air conditioning. Hit 273 with the Mets, with the Astros, and then hit 276 with the Mets, playing again in a park that you would consider pitcher-friendly rather than hitter-friendly, with 75 home runs. With the Astros, he hit 57. He stole 6 bases with the Mets. He stole eight bases with the Astros. The only problem is, and again, I'm confounded sometimes by WAR. I was talking to my brother Jim about this last night, and it's called wins above replacement. So during his stay with the Astros, Staub had a 13.6 WAR collectively. With the Mets, it was 6.8. Now, if you look at it as wins above replacement, fill out what the acronym means that he was 6 points higher with the Mets as a wins above replacement. So better than any replacement by 6 wins, better in his career with the Mets, better 13.6 wins above replacement of any player during those years he spent with the Astros, Staub, okay? What I loved about Staub was this. I loved his stance. This is why I love the way Topps did a nice job with this picture. I didn't realize this. You know, the Mets gave him both number 4, which was Swoboda's number, and then he would later get number 10, which I remember him playing with as an Expo. He was number 10. All right. And of course, he was the first All-Star with the Expos, although he didn't get a chance to play with the Expos. In fact, I think he was, I've talked about this before, 69, 70, and 71. He was the All-Star all 3 years for the new team in town, the first team in Canada in baseball, actually in Major League Baseball history. I just love his stance really never changed. And I do want to read this to you. I saw this and I figured I would read it to you. One of the brightest young players in the National League, Rusty was second on the Houston club in doubles and home runs in '65. His development as a hitter and defensive player has really come as no surprise to the Houston Brass. Last season, I love that when they call the front office the Brass. Last season, Rusty was the best clutch performer on the Astros. He knocked in 81 runs to lead Houston in that department. His 13 home runs was tops for an Astro left-handed batter. At his current rate of progress, Rusty should be among the major league leaders in 1967. It's a lot of fun. I love the cartoons on the back of the baseball card. Probably was maybe deep down an inspiration to, quote unquote, be a cartoonist, a sports cartoonist. Here it is. Rusty led the Astros with 26 doubles in 1966. And in 1962, Rusty led the Carolina League in putouts and assists. All right. So those are the 2 cartoon boxes up there. Pretty cool. Now, another guy that I knew but forgot, but then realized again. I'm going to go through a couple of guys right now that were Astros. Like I said, Beltran probably one day will be a Hall of Famer. Somewhere along the time, had a 70 WAR for his career, over 400 home runs, played for a number of teams. He, like Staub, played for a number of expansion teams, if you think about it. Kansas City, Houston, New York. He played for, I think, Seattle. Let me just get his list up here. But really only played for and this is why, like, for instance, he only had 37 home runs while an Astro. Remember, he was traded for and didn't stay. Had 149 home runs for the Mets, had 100 RBIs, playing 7 seasons in New York. Played originally, he had 435 home runs and a 279 batting average with a 70 WAR for his career. Started over with KC, goes to Houston in one of those late season trades when you want to get into the playoffs, then goes to the Mets. So right there, he's playing for Kansas City, expansion 69, Houston 62. The Mets stayed there, 62 as well. Then goes to Texas and then back to Houston at age 40. He retired. At age 40, not bad, 14 homers, 51 RBIs with a 231 batting average with 29 doubles. And, of course, while with the Mets, had some monster years, including probably his best season with the Mets. At age 29, 2006, 41 homers, 116 RBIs, drew 95 walks, hit 275, and ready for this, was 4th in the MVP, making the All-Star squad and winning the Gold Glove. In fact, he finished 4th in the voting behind, ready for this, Lance Berkman of the Astros, Albert Pujols of the Cardinals, and Ryan Howard of the Phillies. In fact, of the 4, Pujols had the highest WAR, 8.5, which led the league, and Beltran was right behind him at 8.2. So that is Carlos Beltran. Let me give you that. Like the Astro uniform here, absolutely detest this Astro uniform that Mike Scott is in. in these two pictures. Cannot stand. I think I have it. Well, let me move on. But the picture that I use for my cartoon, well, I'll show you the cartoon. Absolutely hate this uniform that the Astros wore in the mid-'70s with those rainbow colors of orange and yellow and off red and all the rest of it. And it became very popular because I know a number of teams at the high school and college level started using that Astro look. I personally like the look in the early 70s. Now, I don't have a good picture of it, but I love the Astro hat, orange, full orange, with the H and the star behind it. And then here's Jesus Alou, one of two family members to play for both the Astros and the Mets. The other, Moises Alou, who happened to be one of my favorite players during the 90s. He, again, another Alou, playing for a number of expansion teams. He played for Miami. He played for the Mets. He played for the Astros. It is unbelievable. And Moises did play for the Mets. I don't know why he didn't get a card. It's just one of those things. Jerry Grote was the guy I wanted to talk about. Grote had a miserable experience with the Astros, came up and just struggled his first 2 years, went down to the minor leagues. And then what happened was they trade him. And he comes to the Mets in the winter of '68. Let me just see what I can do here for you. So Jerry Grote. Here's the thing I didn't realize. Dwight Gooden actually pitched, got 2 decisions for the Astros in 2000. Did not know that, or probably forgot it, but more than likely I forgot it because I didn't know it. But Jerry Grote, 1963 and 64, he came up as a 20-year-old and saw a couple of games. He played 3 games in 1963. 64, they gave him almost, he caught for 2/3 of the season, 100 games, had 3 homers, 24 RBIs, and a 181 batting average. And then goes back down to the minor leagues. Then gets traded, not in 68. He gets traded over the winter, and in 66 he arrives, and immediately, really, he does show improvement. Played 120 games for the Mets. And this, of course, is Astros from the 63 or 64 season. I think with the pennant at 64. Anyway, in 66, the Mets, he has a pretty decent season. Had played 120 games, had 3 homers, 31 RBIs, scored 26, but his batting average goes up to 237, and he drew 40 walks for an on-base percentage of 327, almost 100 points higher. All right? Then fades in 67, goes back down, played the exact amount of games, 195. And then he really does. And here's the interesting thing, and I'm just going to put this out there. In 1968, he makes the All-Star team along with Johnny Bench. And Seaver had both catchers serve as his backstop in games. And he always said that Grote was the better defensive catcher. In 1968, he had a WAR of 2.8, which is his high in his, 3.2 is his high in 75. We'll get back to that in a second. But he has 124 games he played in 68. He had 114 hits, 18 doubles, 3 home runs again, 31 RBIs again. Had 44 walks, but this time hit 282 and had a 357 batting average, on-base percentage, and had 29 runs scored. Makes the All-Star team. And where is the All-Star game? It's in Houston. Grote is an interesting guy because he kind of he had about 17 years in the major leagues, and what I'm amazed about is that he never coached, I believe. And you would think of him as, Grote started the All-Star game that year. One of 2 times he made the All-Star team. The other was 1975. And he actually started the game and then was replaced by Johnny Bench in the game. For all you trivia guys out there, the other catcher was Tom Haller of the Dodgers, who served as the catcher for the National League. The American League had Bill Freehan, Dwayne Josephson, and Joe Askew. So here's Grody. Interestingly enough, gets traded and then appears in his first All-Star game, and it was ironically played in the Astrodome. Now, I have Dave Roberts up here along with Jim Beecham. And before I get to them, so let's see if I have any other guys I want to cover here. How can I forget? Tommy Agee. and the reason I could have gotten the Agee 1970 card, which I believe I had, it's him swinging a bat. He's looking down, swinging the bat down. But I wanted to get to the point that 69 team. Now, it may not have been the greatest offensive team ever amassed, but that team, if you want to give the front office of the Met or the Met brass credit, they acquire Grody, who would be regarded as the best defensive catcher by probably the greatest right-handed pitcher during the 1970s, during the full 70s. I'm not going to include Gibson because he retired in 75. So I'm talking about Tom Seaver, 70 to 79. So he thought he was the best defensive catcher. So they acquire him from the Astros in 69. They get also Ron Taylor from the Astros, Dr. Ron Taylor. And of course, Taylor had some big games for the Mets down the stretch on that 69 squad. And I would say this, along with Don Clendenin, who they acquired from the Astros. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Don Clendenin never played for the Astros, refused to play, I believe, for Harry Walker, who was the manager of the team. So the Pirates push him off to the Expos, and the Mets acquire him in June from the Expos. And of course, he adds some offense and some great play at first base to the Mets. So they pick him up basically off the expansion pile. But they have Grody in the middle. They bring up Bud Harrelson. And they have Ken Boswell along with Wayne Garrett in 69 playing third and second at spots. They have Boswell playing there as well. And Al Weiss playing second base. Now, why? Weiss would come on and have his greatest 5 games ever in his life in the 69 World Series. I am sure for years after that, Earl Weaver woke up with that guy's name being spoken from some nightmare. Weiss. But anyway, they acquired both Weiss and Tommy Agee from the White Sox. After Agee had won the Rookie of the Year, then kind of had a down year. Does make the All-Star team with the White Sox. I think he played out in Anaheim. Then had a down year, and the Mets moved in. They saw a great defensive fielder and good power hitter with great speed. Remember that Agee had stole some bases. So you have in the middle, you have Grody, you have Boswell, a Texan, interestingly enough, who would play for the Astros later on. You have Harrelson, so 2 homegrown guys. Grody, acquired in a trade, and Agee, acquired in a trade. So up the middle, you had a Gold Glove in Agee, you had a Gold Glove in Harrelson, and the only reason that Grody never won a Gold Glove is because of a guy by the name of Johnny Bench, who was his peer at the time. And just to make sure, I'm pretty sure that Grody does not win a Gold Glove. I'm hoping I'm wrong. No, he never won a Gold Glove, but was nevertheless a defensive stalwart. And the Mets, if you ever take a look at that season, we have the ERA, the runs per game were just incredible. They just had good defense up the middle. They had anchors and, well, Gil Hodge had played quite a platoon system. They had Clendenin and Cranepool. He had Jones in his greatest season ever. Actually, Jones started the All-Star game in '69, hit 343, trailed and lost the batting title to Pete Rose, 348 to 343. Had a great season. And in right field, that was being platooned by Art Shamsky, another acquisition, this time from the Reds. Had some pop. Got the Mets like 14, 15 home runs. While with Cincinnati playing in Crosley Field, though, had a couple of seasons there where he really drilled the ball. And then you had Swoboda, of course. People know this. When Carlton struck out 19 Mets in '69, he lost the game 4-2 because Rocky Swoboda hit two-run home runs to spoil a game. And then they had Smooth Eddie Charles, the glider, over at third base, who was a poet. And maybe I'll devote some time to that. So that team really was built around quite a few trades, some smart moves, some smart acquisitions, and then just good, and a little bit of luck, because originally the Braves were going to get Tom Seaver, but there was a problem, some controversy around the bidding, and then he was awarded to the Mets. And really the franchise, everything was history after that. And there's the big if. Imagine if you had Seaver and Necro with Aaron and Cepeda, how good maybe those Braves teams might have been. But here's one of the funniest cards probably in Topps history. This is a great picture. And of course, I'm going to read the Tommy Agee one. After just a so-so year in his last minor league campaign in '65, Tommy climbed his way to prominence with the White Sox batting order last year. The outfielder led the White Sox in batting, doubles, triples, home runs, and total hits in 1966. And in addition, Tommy's 44 stolen bases was a club high. In fact, in '66, he had 22 homers, 86 RBIs, and hit 273 with the White Sox team, which had good pitching and was in the pennant race in '67 until the final days of the year. And I'm going to tell you this, very similar to what he did with the Mets. Let me just do the Mets here with Tommy Agee. I just want to make sure. I know he won a Gold Glove, Tommy Agee, while with the Mets. Gold Glove, two-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year. And in 1970, I believe, he won the Gold Glove. Yes, 1970. And, of course, how can Met fans forget his defensive brilliance in the '69 World Series? Had a home run, had the game of his life, too. Led off the bottom of the Met game with a home run, and then made a number of catches in the outfield that saved about 4 or 5 runs in that individual game. So, last but not least, but I love this one because I have to be honest with you. This is Tommy Agee. This might be Roger Metzger. I don't know who this is or this, but it's just a weird picture. I just think of that baseball card collecting book that I had, and it looks like, or it reminds me of a picture. It might have been Al Zari or something, and he's looking up similar to this, and the caption was, "Is someone throwing you a bag of balls or whatever?" And here Agee looks like he's in the same situation. I know obviously he's going after a fly ball, but I don't know whether it was subtle that they put him, Tommy's name under the player here, but it's kind of hard. And you wonder, is he struggling with it? And does he actually make the catch? And this is at Shea. You can tell it's at Shea just by the wall. 371 in the backfield. I just think it's a strange picture. And, Topps did have regular pictures at one point, and then they had in action. But that's not an in action picture because they used to write, the player in action. All right, let me transition to the final 5 minutes. These 4 players were in uniform the night of the very first game that I attended at Shea, August 22nd, 1972. I was going into the 7th grade. It would be the first time I was at a game. It would be the first time I think my brothers were back to Shea in a while. I have to say I'm going to take a little bit of pleasure and honor and kudos for being the one smart enough to say, hey, let's go to a game. The men can go out to the game. So my dad, we purchased the tickets. We were down the left field line. We wanted box seats, and that was the best you could do. But hey, listen, I wasn't complaining. And I remember a number of things. The very first player I ever saw, major leaguer, was Jesus Salou, and he was down that left field line. And I know Howard can recall it, but it was down the left field line. It was about 343 from home plate. There was like a little brick wall or facade. And there was an area where players or the fans could look down on the field. You're kind of high up, about 15 feet, I would say. And I just remember Jesus Salou carrying on conversations with people in the audience, in the stands, while batting practice was going on. I thought it was the coolest thing. And here's the deal. That night, it's one of the greatest nights ever. It was, and I remember this, 30,000 fans were there. The Mets were not in the race. They were 11 games behind the Pirates. And of course, that would be Pirates and Reds again meeting. But here was the deal. In that particular game, it was played August 22nd, 1972. The Mets win the game 4-2. On the mound for the Mets, or on the mound for the Astros, was a guy by the name of Dave Roberts, who they acquired from the Padres. And I think he started in the Detroit franchise, Detroit Tiger franchise. Anyway, he wasn't a bad pitcher. Actually, he was pretty good. He just, in fact, he led the league in ERA, I think, in 1971 with the Padres. And so they saw something in a lefty. He was a lefty. They acquired him. He was pretty good that year. He was 10-6 after this game. The Mets do win the game 4-2. On the mound for the Mets, and I know my brother Eddie had joy in his heart, was Tom Seaver. It was just the way that the rotation figured, and Seaver would strike out 10 Astros that night after giving them a 1-0 lead, courtesy of an error by a player who I do not remember, Lute Barnes, who played second base, actually had 2 hits in the game, made an error that cost the Mets an early run. It was unearned. He would later Seaver would give up a home run to Bob Watson, a future GM of the Mets, of the Yankees, a future player with both the Yankees and the Red Sox, one of the last Red Sox to be to hit for the cycle. I think in '79, he was a good player. Probably had he not played in the Astrodome, you would have seen a player that would have hit 20 home runs, 100 RBIs, and probably near 300 almost every year. He was a solid hitter. He was another guy that really didn't have a position. Came up as a catcher, Bob Watson did, and then eventually moved to first and kind of lingered out in left field, but found a position with the Astros for a while there as a first baseman, which is one of the reasons why they moved Lee May eventually. Ready for this, the order for the Astros. Metzger, Rogers, and I remember Roger Metzger had a lawn mower accident where I think a couple of his fingers were mangled, or even he lost a couple of fingers and basically ended his career. Roger Metzger, I believe it was Metzger. Cesar Cedeno in center, just young, just coming up. Jimmy Wynn, the toy cannon. Lee May, who had hit 29 home runs that year. Bob Watson. Norm Miller, who would be a subject of many stories in Ball 4. Johnny Edwards, a catcher acquired from the Reds. I never realized how big he was. He was like 6'5". Doug Rader, the Rooster, playing third base. Solid defensive third baseman. Tommy Helms, acquired in the Lee May and Joe Morgan deal, playing second. Dave Roberts would be the pitcher and the pitcher of record in the game. In fact, Seaver and he would pitch collectively 16.2 of the 17 innings in the game. Seaver only gave up 7 hits, 2 runs, 1 earned, 2 walks, 10 strikeouts. Roberts had 7 strikeouts. Roberts' only problem? Jim Beecham, who played for both the Astros and the Mets, enjoyed one of his great nights in a Met uniform. He went 3 for 4 with a run scored, 4 RBIs, and he hit a home run, his third of the year in the 4th inning, a solo shot off Dave Roberts to tie the game. And then he would have a 2-run single in the 8th inning. And then Seaver would come on in the 9th and take down the Astros. Basically, I'm going to tell you this, 1, 2, 3. Let me just see real quick if I can do it. Seaver got Rader on a ground out, got Tommy Helms on a pop-up, and then got Jimmy Stewart, the other guy acquired by the Astros in the Morgan deal, on a pop-up to the third baseman. In fact, Jim Beecham's single scored Wayne Garrett and Duffy Dyer, who was in the game because Grody, I think, might have been hurt. And it's interesting that of Seaver's last 6 outs, he only got 1 strikeout, and that was Norm Miller looking, interestingly enough. So he really had 9 strikeouts over 7 full innings. So those are some of the Mets who played for the Astros, and some of the Astros who played for the Mets. And I covered many, but not all, here on Park Ridge Sports History. I'd like to thank Howard for the idea and the great inspiration by you, and for you, the audience, for tuning in each week. See you next week with another edition. This is Will O'Toole. Thank you.